Single dad thought it was just a dinner invitation, until a woman showed up as his date and changed everything. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Tyler Brennan was sitting in his truck outside the Boston Harbor Hotel on December 19th at 7:15, staring at the valet parking sign like it personally offended him, and he was seriously considering just turning around and heading back to his apartment because wearing his dress uniform to what he thought was just another department fundraiser felt like overkill. But his fire captain had specifically told him to show up looking sharp, so here he was. The invitation had come in the mail 3 weeks ago on fancy cardstock with gold lettering that said Firefighter Foundation Charity Gala, and Tyler had tossed it on his kitchen counter with all the other work stuff, figured it was one of those obligatory events where you eat rubber chicken and listen to speeches about community service, and shake hands with donors who want to feel good about themselves. Nothing he hadn't done a dozen times before. What Tyler didn't know, and honestly had zero reason to suspect, was that his captain had been scheming with someone from Boston Memorial Hospital to set him up on a blind date disguised as a work event, because apparently everyone in his life had decided 2.5 years was long enough to be alone, and they were taking matters into their own hands, whether he liked it or not. His daughter Chloe had stayed with his sister tonight, and she had asked him that morning while he was making her toast why he had to go to a boring grown-up dinner, and Tyler had ruffled her hair and said, "Because Captain Rodriguez says I have to, kiddo, but I'll be home before you wake up tomorrow, and we'll get pancakes." And Chloe had made him pinky promise, which he did, because you don't break pinky promises with a 6-year-old who's already lost her mom. Jenna had been gone for 2 years and 7 months, and Tyler still counted the time like that. In months, not years, because somehow months felt more honest about how long he'd been doing this single dad thing while trying not to fall apart in front of his crew or his daughter. She died on a random Tuesday in May from an undiagnosed heart condition that hit her like a freight train while she was picking Chloe up from preschool. And by the time the ambulance got her to Boston Memorial ER, there wasn't anything anyone could do. And Tyler had spent the last 900 and some days replaying that phone call he got at the firehouse, telling him to get to the hospital immediately. He forced himself out of the truck and walked into the hotel lobby that was decorated within an inch of its life, with twinkling lights and ice sculptures, and a string quartet playing in the corner. And Tyler felt wildly out of place, even in his dress uniform, because this was way fancier than he'd expected for a department thing. Meanwhile, across the city, Cara Mitchell was standing in front of her bathroom mirror in her apartment in Somerville, doing that thing where you second-guess every single clothing choice you've ever made, and her best friend and supervisor at the hospital had convinced her this was a good idea, that she needed to get back out there, that her fiancé Ben would want her to try even though it had been 4 years since the funeral. "It's just dinner with a nice guy, low pressure. He's a firefighter, so you'll have stuff in common. Just try Cara, please," her supervisor had said 2 weeks ago, and Cara had eventually agreed, mostly to get everyone off her back about her non-existent dating life. She'd been working night shifts in the ER at Boston Memorial for 6 years now, and the job had become her entire personality. Every spare moment volunteering for extra shifts, or mentoring new nurses, or doing literally anything that kept her too busy to think about the apartment that still felt too empty. The invitation she'd received had explicitly said, "Join us for an evening benefiting the Firefighter Foundation. Your date will meet you at table 8. And Cara had assumed that meant someone had actually set her up properly with a guy who knew this was happening, not whatever disaster was about to unfold. She got to the Harbor Hotel at 7:30 and checked in with the coordinator, who looked at her clipboard and said, "Oh, you're with Tyler Brennan. Table 8, he should already be here." And Cara's stomach did this nervous flip because she was really doing this. Really about to have dinner with a complete stranger and pretend she knew how to be a normal person who dated. She walked into the ballroom and scanned the table numbers until she found table 8 in the corner, and there was a guy sitting there alone in a Boston Fire Department dress uniform, looking at his phone with this expression that clearly said he'd rather be anywhere else on planet Earth. Tyler looked up when he heard heels approaching and saw a woman in a dark blue dress heading straight for his table, and his brain took a second to register that she was smiling at him specifically before she said, "Tyler, hi, I'm Cara. It's really nice to meet you." Tyler stood up on autopilot because his mom had raised him with manners and shook her hand while his brain was scrambling to figure out who this person was and why she was talking to him like they had plans, and he said, hey, I'm sorry, do we know each other? And watched her face shift from friendly to confused in about 2 seconds flat. Cara's smile faltered and she glanced at the table number, then back at him. You're Tyler Brennan, right? Table 8? I was told we were sitting together tonight. And Tyler looked at the place settings and saw two name cards, one that said his name and one that said Cara Mitchell plus guest, and his stomach dropped straight through the floor. I think there's been some kind of mix-up, Tyler started to say, but then the event coordinator appeared out of nowhere with a clipboard and said way too cheerfully, oh, good you two found each other. We were worried about the timing. Enjoy your evening, and disappeared before either of them could ask what the hell was happening. Cara sat down slowly and Tyler did the same, and they both just stared at each other across the fancy table settings with the awkward tension so thick you could cut it with the butter knife. And finally Cara said, okay, I'm just going to be really honest. My boss told me this was a setup, like a blind date situation. Did someone not tell you that? Tyler's face must have done something incredible because Cara actually winced and said, oh my God, they didn't tell you. I'm so sorry, this is mortifying. Tyler ran his hand over his face and let out this laugh that was more disbelief than humor. My captain told me this was a department fundraiser I had to attend. I had no idea I was supposed to be on a date. I don't even know what to say right now. Cara looked like she wanted to disappear under the table, and Tyler felt bad because none of this was her fault. They'd both been ambushed by well-meaning people who clearly had zero boundaries. We can just sit through dinner and pretend this didn't happen, Cara offered quietly. I know this isn't what you signed up for, and I'm really sorry. And Tyler shook his head. It's not your fault. They got both of us. Might as well make the best of it since we're stuck here for the next 3 hours anyway. The waiter started bringing out the first course, and Tyler figured he might as well try to make conversation since they were trapped at this table together. So he asked her what she did for work, and Cara said, I'm an ER trauma nurse over at Boston Memorial. And Tyler felt something cold settle in his chest because that was the hospital, the place where Jenna died. But he just nodded and said, that's gotta be intense work. They made it through the salad course with polite small talk about Boston winters and terrible hospital coffee and how his daughter was obsessed with building blanket forts. And Cara was actually really easy to talk to once they got past the horrifying awkwardness of the setup. She had this dry sense of humor that caught him off guard in the best way. Halfway through the main course, one of the foundation directors got up to give a speech about fallen firefighters and the families they left behind, and Tyler felt his jaw tighten because he knew what was coming. The emotional appeal to get people to open their wallets, and sure enough, they started showing photos of firefighters who died in the line of duty over the past decade. Cara went very still next to him, and Tyler glanced over and saw her eyes were locked on the screen, where a photo of a young firefighter in dress uniform was displayed, and he heard her take in this shaky breath before she whispered, that's Ben, my fiancé. He died 4 years ago in a structure fire in Dorchester. Tyler looked at her and saw she was crying quietly, and every instinct he had kicked in, the same ones that made him good at his job, and he reached over and squeezed her hand without thinking about it and said, I'm so sorry, Cara. I lost my wife 2.5 years ago. Different circumstances, but I get it. The speeches make it all feel like yesterday instead of years ago. She squeezed back, and they sat there holding hands like two people who understood each other in a way most people couldn't, watching the slideshow of loss while everyone around them clapped politely. And when the speech ended and the lights came back up, neither of them let go right away. They finished dinner actually talking for real, swapping stories about navigating grief and single parenthood. Well, Tyler's parenthood and Cara's work family at the hospital. And by the time dessert arrived, Tyler realized he was actually enjoying himself, despite the completely dishonest way he'd ended up here. Around 10 o'clock, when people started leaving, Cara and Tyler walked out to the lobby together, and she turned to him with this genuine smile and said, thank you for making the best of a really weird situation. You're actually pretty great to talk to, even if we were both tricked into showing up. Tyler found himself smiling back. You too. And hey, if you ever want to grab coffee without our bosses conspiring behind our backs, here's my number. and he handed her his business card from the fire station. Cara took it and pulled out her phone. I'm texting you right now, so you have mine too. I'd really like that, Tyler. And when she said his name, it didn't sound like pity or awkwardness. It just sounded like someone who might actually want to see him again. Tyler drove home that night, thinking maybe his captain wasn't completely out of line setting this up. And Cara drove back to her apartment in Somerville feeling something close to hopeful for the first time in years. But when she got inside and changed out of her dress, she did something she hadn't done in months. The next morning before her shift, she went straight to the records terminal in the break room and logged into the hospital's patient database with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, typed in the date she remembered too well, and scrolled until she found it. Her heart stopped when she saw the name on the screen. Patient Jennifer Brennan brought in by ambulance at 4:17 p.m. with acute cardiac arrest. Spouse Tyler Brennan contacted and arrived at 5:02 p.m. Patient pronounced at 6:15 p.m. Primary trauma nurse Cara Mitchell. She sat there staring at the screen and felt her entire world tilt sideways because the man she just spent 3 hours laughing with, the man whose hand she'd held during that speech, was the same man who'd fallen apart in her ER hallway 2.5 years ago while she tried and failed to save his wife. Cara spent the entire next day at work running on maybe 3 hours of sleep, replaying that moment when she'd seen Tyler's name on the patient file. And the worst part was she hadn't put it together during the gala until the very end when they were exchanging numbers and he'd mentioned his last name fully. Brennan, not just Tyler, and her brain had immediately flashed back to that terrible shift in May where she'd done chest compressions on a woman named Jennifer Brennan while a firefighter husband waited in the hall. She kept telling herself she needed to say something, that the right thing to do was call him and explain before this went any further. But every time she picked up her phone, her chest got tight and her hands started shaking. Because what was she supposed to say? Hey, remember how I said I'm a trauma nurse? Well, funny story, I was actually the one working on your wife when she died, and I've been carrying that failure around for 2.5 years. Tyler texted her 3 days after the gala, asking if she wanted to grab coffee that weekend, and Cara stared at the message for 20 minutes before finally typing back, I'd really like that, because she was apparently a coward who was going to let this happen, even though she knew it was wrong. They met at a cafe in Cambridge on Saturday morning, and Tyler showed up in jeans and a hoodie, looking nothing like the formal uniform guy from the gala. And they talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing. His daughter's obsession with unicorns, her terrible apartment with the radiator that clanked all night, the best pizza spots in Boston, and it was so easy and comfortable that Cara almost forgot about the massive secret sitting between them like a third person at the table. Over the next month, they fell into this pattern of meeting up once or twice a week, always during the day while Chloe was at school or with Tyler's sister. And Cara kept telling herself she was going to come clean, that she'd find the right moment to explain, but the right moment never came because how do you bring that up without destroying everything? Tyler mentioned Jenna sometimes in passing. Little comments like, my wife used to make this amazing lasagna, or Jenna loved this time of year before she got sick. And every single time Cara's stomach would twist because she wanted to say, I know, I remember, I was there. But instead she just nodded and listened and hated herself a little more. The thing was, Cara genuinely believed she didn't deserve this. Didn't deserve Tyler's kindness or his slowly growing feelings, or the way he looked at her like she was someone worth knowing. Because she'd failed the most important person in his entire world, and no amount of medical training or protocol could change that fact in her mind. The first week of January, Tyler asked if Cara wanted to meet Chloe, and her immediate instinct was to say no, to pull back before this got more complicated. But she heard herself saying, I'd love to, because apparently she couldn't help herself. They met at a park in Brookline on a Saturday afternoon, and Chloe came running up wearing light-up sneakers and a jacket covered in unicorn patches. And she looked at Cara with the kind of direct intensity only 6-year-olds can pull off and said, Are you my dad's girlfriend? Tyler looked mortified and started to apologize, but Cara just laughed and knelt down to Chloe's level and said, I'm your dad's friend. Is that okay with you? Chloe considered this very seriously, then nodded and said, Do you know how to braid hair because Dad's terrible at it? They spent the afternoon at the playground, and Cara taught Chloe a simple braid technique, while Tyler pushed some other kid on the swings because apparently single dads just helped out whoever needed it. And when Chloe hugged her goodbye and said, "You're really nice, I hope you come back," Cara felt something crack wide open in her chest. That night after Chloe was in bed, Tyler called her and said, "She hasn't taken to someone new like that since Jenna died. I don't know what you did, but thank you." And Cara had to bite her lip to keep from crying because she wanted to tell him so badly, but the words just wouldn't come out. The silence wasn't about deceiving Tyler or protecting the relationship. It was about the fact that Cara fundamentally believed she was a reminder of his worst day walking around in human form. And if he knew the truth, he'd look at her differently. He'd see the nurse who couldn't save his wife instead of just Cara. And she couldn't handle that. Mid-January, Tyler started opening up more about the day Jenna died, and Cara felt like she was being slowly crushed under the weight of her own silence. "It happened at Boston Memorial," Tyler said one night over dinner at a Thai place in Alston. "They called me at the station, and by the time I got there, the doctors said there was nothing they could do. Her heart just gave out. Some condition nobody knew she had." Cara focused very hard on her pad thai and said, "That must have been terrifying." And Tyler nodded. "I keep thinking about the nurses and doctors who tried, wondering if they remember her or if she was just another case. You know." Kara's hands were shaking, so she put down her fork and said, "I'm sure they remember. Trauma cases like that stay with you." And it was the most honest thing she'd said in weeks, but Tyler didn't catch the weight behind it. She started pulling back after that conversation, taking longer to respond to texts, saying she had extra shifts when really she was just sitting in her apartment, staring at the wall trying to figure out how to extract herself from this situation without completely falling apart. Tyler noticed immediately because of course he did. He was observant in that quiet way that made him good at his job. And he showed up at her building one evening in late January and said, "Did I do something wrong? Because you've been weird for 2 weeks and I need to know if I should back off." Cara wanted to tell him everything right there in her lobby, but instead she said, "I'm just dealing with some stuff at work. It's not you, I promise," which was technically true, but also completely a lie. And Tyler looked at her like he didn't quite believe her, but he nodded and said, "Okay, but I'm here if you want to talk about it." The breaking point came in early February when Tyler did something Cara never expected. He decided he was ready to actually move forward with his life in a real way, not just dating casually, but genuinely letting go of the past enough to build something new. He'd been avoiding Jenna's hospital records for 2.5 years, couldn't bring himself to look at the medical details of how she died. But he woke up one Tuesday morning and thought, if I'm going to do this with Cara, if I'm going to let myself love someone again, I need closure. Real closure, not just time passing. He called Boston Memorial's records department and requested copies of everything from that day. And when the envelope arrived 2 weeks later, he sat at his kitchen table after Chloe went to bed and opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The first page was the admission report, time of arrival, preliminary assessment, patient unresponsive, and Tyler made himself read every single word even though his vision kept blurring. He got to the section about the trauma team response and saw the names listed: attending physician Dr. Raymond Shen, resident Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, primary trauma nurse Cara Mitchell, and Tyler's brain just completely stopped processing information for a solid 30 seconds. He read the name again, then pulled out his phone and looked at Cara's contact info like maybe he'd gotten it wrong. But no, it was definitely the same person. Cara Mitchell, who worked at Boston Memorial as an ER trauma nurse. Cara Mitchell, who he'd been seeing for 2 months. Cara Mitchell, who'd been there the day his wife died. Tyler sat with that information for 2 full days, not saying anything to anyone, just turning it over in his head, trying to make sense of the timeline. And the more he thought about it, the more certain he became that she'd known from the very beginning. She'd recognized his name at the gala, or shortly after. She'd known exactly who he was and what Boston Memorial meant to him, and she'd never said a single word. And Tyler couldn't figure out if he was more hurt or angry or just completely blindsided. On the third day, he drove to her apartment in Somerville at 8 o'clock at night and knocked on her door. And when Cara opened it and saw his face, she knew immediately that he'd found out. "You knew," Tyler said, and his voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that made Cara's hands go cold. "From the beginning, you knew who I was." Cara stepped back and let him in, because this conversation wasn't happening in the hallway. And she closed the door and turned to face him and said, "Yes, I knew. I recognized your name, and I looked it up to be sure, and I should have told you immediately, but I didn't, and I'm so sorry, Tyler." He was just standing in her living room looking at her like he was seeing a completely different person. And he said, "Why, why wouldn't you tell me something like that? Did you think I wouldn't find out eventually?" Cara felt tears starting, but she forced herself to stay steady because she owed him honesty, even if it was 2 months too late. "I've been carrying the guilt of that night for 2.5 years," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. "I did everything right medically, we all did, but she still died and I couldn't save her. And when I saw you at that gala, I thought maybe I could just disappear before you figured out who I was. But then I couldn't stay away and I kept telling myself I didn't deserve to tell you, that I didn't deserve any of this." Tyler's jaw was tight and he shook his head. "You don't get to decide what I deserve to know, Cara. You don't get to protect me by lying through silence. I trusted you. I brought you around my daughter. And this whole time you knew you were connected to the worst day of my life." "I know," Cara said, and she was crying now. "You're right, I was wrong. I was a coward. I should have told you that first night, and I didn't, because I was terrified you'd look at me and only see the person who failed to save Jenna." Tyler ran his hand through his hair and looked at the ceiling, and Cara could see him trying to hold himself together. And finally he said, "I need time to figure out if I can get past this. I can't do this right now." And he walked out, leaving Cara standing in her apartment, feeling like her entire world had just collapsed. Tyler spent the next 10 days feeling like he was walking around with his chest cracked open, and he went through the motions at work and with Chloe, but his brain was stuck in this loop of anger and understanding that kept switching back and forth until he couldn't tell which one he was supposed to feel. His sister came over one night after Chloe went to bed and found him sitting at the kitchen table staring at Jenna's medical records for probably the 100th time, and she sat down across from him and said, "You've been looking at those papers like they're going to give you different answers. What's going on?" Tyler told her everything. The whole messy story about Cara being Jenna's nurse and hiding it for 6 weeks. And his sister listened without interrupting and then said something that hit him harder than he expected. "Sounds like she was punishing herself for something that wasn't her fault. And yeah, she should have told you. But Tyler, you've been punishing yourself too. Thinking you should have known Jenna had a heart condition. Thinking you should have been there faster. Maybe you two have more in common than you want to admit." That conversation stuck with Tyler, and he found himself reading through the medical records one more time, but actually paying attention to the details instead of just looking for Cara's name. And he saw the timestamps showing she'd started interventions within 90 seconds of Jenna arriving, saw the notes about multiple attempts to restart her heart, saw the attending physician's summary that said catastrophic cardiac event with zero warning signs and no survivable outcome regardless of intervention. Tyler sat with that information and let himself actually absorb it. That Cara had done everything possible. That Jenna's death wasn't anyone's fault. It was just a terrible random thing that happened. And holding on to anger at Cara for not saving her was just another way of not accepting that some things can't be fixed no matter how hard you try. But he also sat with the hurt of her not telling him, because understanding why she stayed silent didn't automatically make it okay, and he needed to figure out if he could move forward with someone who'd made that choice, even if he understood the reasons behind it. On day 10, Tyler picked up his phone and called Cara's number, and she answered on the second ring with a voice that sounded like she'd been crying for the past week and a half, which honestly, she probably had. "Tyler," she said his name like a question, and he could hear the hope and fear mixed together, and he said, "I need to say some things, and I need you to just listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" Cara agreed immediately, and Tyler took a breath. "I've spent the last 10 days reading those medical records over and over, and I need you to hear me when I say you didn't fail Jenna. You did everything right, and she died anyway because sometimes people just die, and it's nobody's fault. But Cara, you did fail me by not being honest, and I need to know if you can understand the difference between those two things." There was silence on the other end, and then Cara said quietly, "I do understand, and you're right. I'm so sorry, Tyler." They agreed to meet the next day at a coffee shop in the South End, neutral territory where neither of them had memories attached. And Tyler got there first and sat in the back corner, watching the door until Cara walked in, looking like she hadn't slept in days. She sat down across from him, and her hands were shaking when she wrapped them around the coffee cup she'd ordered. And Tyler noticed she wasn't wearing makeup to cover up the fact that she'd clearly been crying, and somehow that mattered, that she wasn't trying to hide what this had cost her. "I've been thinking about what you said on the phone," Cara started, and Tyler shook his head. "Let me go first. I've been practicing this, and if I don't say it now, I'm going to lose my nerve." She nodded, and Tyler leaned forward. "I forgive you for not saving Jenna, even though there's nothing to forgive because you did your job, and sometimes the job isn't enough. I've been a firefighter long enough to know that, but I'm still hurt that you didn't tell me who you were, and I need to know why I should trust that you won't hide hard things from me in the future." Kara's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. "You shouldn't trust that, not based on anything I've done so far. All I can tell you is that I've learned something from this, and it's that trying to protect someone by hiding the truth just hurts them worse in the end. And Tyler, if you give me another chance, I swear I will tell you the hard things even when I'm scared, even when I think it might push you away, because you deserve honesty, and I robbed you of that." Tyler felt something loosen in his chest. "I don't need you to be perfect, Cara. I need you to be real with me. Can you do that?" She nodded and reached across the table for his hand. "Yes, I can do that. And if you need more time, or if this is too broken to fix, I'll understand. But I need you to know I love you, and I think I have since that ridiculous gala. And losing you has been worse than any guilt I was carrying." Tyler squeezed her hand and felt tears burning behind his eyes. "I love you too. That's why this hurts so much. And I don't need more time. I just need to know we're on the same page about what happens next." They talked for another hour about boundaries and honesty and what it would look like to rebuild trust. And it wasn't some perfect movie moment where everything was instantly fixed. It was two people who'd both been running from their pain, finally standing still long enough to deal with it. Cara told him about the therapy she'd started the week after their fight, how she was working through the guilt she'd been carrying from multiple patients over the years, not just Jenna. And Tyler told her about finally talking to someone at the fire department about his own grief instead of just pushing through it. They left that coffee shop holding hands, and Tyler felt like maybe they were going to be okay. Not right away, but eventually, and eventually felt like enough. 6 months went by, and they did the work, the hard conversations and the therapy, and the slowly learning how to be honest even when it sucked. And Chloe asked one morning over breakfast, "Is Cara going to be around forever now, Daddy?" And Tyler had smiled and said, "I hope so, kiddo. How would you feel about that?" Chloe had thrown her arms around his neck and said, "I'd feel really happy because she taught me how to braid my own hair, and she doesn't treat me like a baby," which was apparently the highest praise a 6-year-old could give. Tyler had been planning this for weeks, talked to Chloe about it because she deserved to be part of the decision. And on a Saturday afternoon in September, he took Cara back to the park in Brookline, where she'd first met his daughter all those months ago. They were sitting on the same bench where he'd watched Cara and Chloe do cartwheels, and Cara was laughing about something that happened at the hospital when Tyler said, "I need to tell you something, and I'm really nervous about it." And she turned to look at him with concern in her eyes. Tyler slid off the bench onto one knee on the grass and pulled out the ring he'd been carrying in his jacket pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. "Cara Mitchell, you taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means being honest enough to move forward. You loved my daughter before you loved me, and that tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life showing you that you deserve every bit of happiness you were afraid to ask for?" Cara was crying and nodding before he even finished talking. "Yes, absolutely yes. I can't imagine my life without you and Chloe in it." And Tyler stood up and kissed her while a couple of kids playing nearby started clapping, because apparently they'd had an audience the whole time. They got married the following spring at a small ceremony in the Boston Public Garden with just family and close friends. And Chloe took her job as flower girl so seriously she'd made Tyler practice the processional with her like 15 times. Tyler's vows were short, but they destroyed everyone. "Cara, you were there on the worst day of my life, and you fought for Jenna even though I didn't know it yet. And then you showed up again when I needed someone to fight for me. You taught me that loving you doesn't mean I loved her less. It means my heart grew big enough for both. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me the hard truths even when you were scared. Cara's vows made even the photographer cry. Tyler, you taught me that healing requires honesty, that I can't protect people by hiding from them, that forgiveness is something you choose every single day. I promise to always tell you the truth, to choose you every morning, and to love Chloe like she's my own because in every way that matters she is. The reception was at a small restaurant in the North End, and Chloe spent most of it showing anyone who would listen her new dress and explaining that she now had a mom again, but different. And Tyler watched his daughter dance with Cara and felt this overwhelming gratitude that he'd been given a second chance at building a family. His fire captain came up to him at one point and said, I'm taking full credit for this. You know, that gala setup was genius. And Tyler laughed and said, you're lucky it worked out because I was ready to kill you for a while there. 8 months after the wedding, when Christmas rolled around, Tyler and Cara were in their house decorating the tree with Chloe, who was now 8 and had opinions about every single ornament placement. And Cara hung up a special one she'd had made that had a photo of Jenna on it with the words, "Forever part of our story," engraved underneath. Tyler saw it and felt his throat get tight, and Cara came over and put her arm around him. She gave you Chloe, and she deserves to be remembered, not erased. I hope that's okay. Tyler kissed the top of her head. It's more than okay. Thank you for understanding that she'll always be part of this. And Chloe came running over and said, I think my first mommy would really like you, Cara. Daddy said she always wanted him to be happy, and you make him smile all the time. They stood there in front of the Christmas tree, this family built on loss and honesty and the choice to keep trying. And Tyler thought about how close he'd come to walking away that night in Cara's apartment. How easy it would have been to let anger win instead of fighting for something real. Sometimes the people who enter your life carry pieces of your past you didn't expect. And the question isn't whether they should have been honest from the start. It's whether you're both willing to do the hard work of rebuilding once the truth comes out. Tyler didn't get a perfect love story. He got a real one, messy and complicated and built on two people choosing each other, even when it would have been easier to walk away. Cara didn't get to erase her guilt by loving Tyler. She got to learn that forgiveness starts with forgiving yourself, and honesty is the only foundation worth building on. If this story reminded you that second chances are possible, but they require truth and work and grace from everyone involved, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear that healing doesn't erase the past, it honors it by choosing to move forward. Thanks for being here with us. Drop a comment about where you're watching from, and remember that the strongest relationships aren't the ones that never face hard truths. They're the ones that face them together and come out stronger on the other side.